The alarms were screaming before I even opened my eyes. I am Vesic, and on that morning, the last ship that still owed my people anything was leaving orbit without us. I ran through the corridor of our colony station with my sister Osa gripping my hand so tight it hurt. Behind us, the medical bay was full of coughing, and the sound followed us like something alive. Our father, Doran, stood at the window of the control room, watching a bright dot shrink into the black sky. That dot was the Velkar trade vessel, the last one scheduled to visit Ril 7 before the quarantine notice went out. It did not slow down. It did not answer our calls. It simply left. I remember the silence after that. Not a peaceful silence. A silence that told us nobody was coming. The sickness had arrived in a shipment of grain 3 weeks earlier. Nobody had checked it properly, because nobody expected danger from something as simple as food. Within days, our farmers were coughing blood into their sleeves. Within a week, our doctors ran out of answers. Within 2 weeks, every ship that could leave our system did leave, and none of them looked back. I was 22 years old enough to understand what abandonment looked like, and young enough to still hope someone would change their mind. Nobody did. The Velkar Assembly, who had traded with us for generations, sent one short message. They said our colony was now flagged as a health risk, and all contact was suspended until further notice. The Tessine Concord, who owed my grandmother's family a great debt from an old rescue during the ice storms, sent nothing at all. Even our own cousins on the outer colonies, the ones who shared our blood and our language, stopped answering our calls within days. We were alone on a dying rock, and every star in the sky belonged to someone who had decided we were not worth saving. My mother, Ilsa, held Osa through the worst of her fever that week. My sister was only 12 years old, and her lungs had already started to fail like everyone else's. I remember sitting beside her cot, listening to her breathe, counting each breath because I was afraid to stop counting. On the 11th day after the last ship left, an alarm rang through the station that none of us recognized. It was not the warning siren. It was a different sound, one that meant something was approaching from deep space. We rushed to the observation deck, expecting another empty ship passing by, another vessel avoiding us on its way to somewhere safer. Instead, we saw a small transport craft breaking through the cloud line, its hull marked with symbols none of us had seen before. It was human. I did not know much about humans then. My people had traded with them only a handful of times, mostly through distant contracts, nothing personal. I remember my father whispering that this must be a mistake, that they must not have received the quarantine warning. They had received it. The pilot said so herself, the moment she stepped off the ship in a protective suit 2 sizes too big for her frame. Her name was Grace Bennett, and she walked straight toward my father without hesitation, holding a medical case in one hand and a small translation device in the other. She did not waste time with formalities. She asked where the sickest patients were. My father, still stunned, led her toward the medical bay, and I followed close behind, still holding Osa's hand. Grace knelt beside my sister's cot and began scanning her with a small device, her face calm even though the numbers on the screen must have looked terrible. I asked her, in broken words through the translator, why she had come when everyone else had left. She looked up at me and said something I will never forget. She said that when a call for help goes out and nobody answers, that silence becomes its own kind of alarm, and her team could not ignore it. Within an hour, more human ships arrived. They were not warships. They were cargo carriers and medical transports, filled with supplies, filters, and a team of scientists led by a tired but determined man named Daniel Ross. He walked through our station like he had already decided to stay, long before anyone gave him permission. I watched them set up equipment in our contaminated fields without complaint, without asking for payment, without asking for anything at all except access to our sick and our soil. They wore protective suits, yes, but they did not treat us like something dangerous to avoid. They treated us like people who needed help. The first week was the hardest. The sickness fought back against every treatment they tried. I remember standing in the medical bay at night, watching Grace and her team work through exhaustion that should have stopped them hours earlier. Daniel Ross did not sleep more than a few hours a night for the first 5 days. When I asked him why he pushed himself so hard, he simply said that giving up was not a decision his team liked to make lightly. My sister's fever broke on the 7th day, not because the sickness was cured, but because the humans had found a way to slow it down long enough for her small body to fight back. I remember the sound of her first full breath without coughing. I remember crying, though I tried to hide it from her. The Velkar Assembly sent another message during that time. It said they were monitoring the situation from a distance and would resume contact once the risk had passed. I remember reading that message aloud to Daniel Ross, expecting him to react with anger. Instead, he simply shook his head and returned to his work, as if the message from our old allies meant nothing at all compared to the task in front of him. Weeks passed, and the humans did not leave. Their supplies ran low more than once, and each time, they simply rationed what they had rather than retreat. I remember a young engineer named Peter Whitfield, who spent 3 days straight rebuilding our water filtration system using spare parts scavenged from his own ship, parts his crew clearly needed for their return journey. I asked him once why he would take that risk. He told me that a working filtration system meant clean water for children like my sister, and that mattered more to him than a comfortable trip home. The sickness continued to mutate, adapting to each treatment the humans developed. I remember the frustration on their faces when a breakthrough failed within days, but I never once saw them consider leaving. Instead, they grew more determined, working longer hours, testing new combinations, refusing to accept that our colony was beyond saving. There was a night, deep into the first month, when everything nearly fell apart. A storm rolled across the northern plains of Ril 7, the kind of storm that used to knock out power lines even before the sickness arrived. It struck the main generator feeding the medical bay, and for almost an hour, the machines keeping our weakest patients stable ran on nothing but backup batteries. I remember running through the dark corridors with Peter Whitfield, both of us carrying spare cells toward the bay, while outside the wind tried to tear the roof panels loose. Daniel Ross stood in the doorway directing everyone with a calm voice that did not match the panic on his face. Grace Bennett refused to leave a single patient's side, holding a manual pump by hand for nearly 40 minutes until the backup system stabilized. When the lights finally returned, nobody cheered. Everyone simply kept working, as if stopping to celebrate might invite the storm back. A few days after that, one of the supply ships bringing fresh medicine from a nearby human outpost lost contact during its approach through a debris field near our system's edge. For 6 hours, we did not know if the medicine we desperately needed would ever arrive, or if the crew aboard that ship were safe. Daniel Ross paced the control room the entire time, refusing food, refusing rest, until a faint signal finally confirmed the ship had survived a rough landing on a moon nearby. He organized a rescue crew within minutes, flying out personally to retrieve both the crew and the cargo, returning only when he was certain everyone was safe. I asked him afterward why he risked so much for a single shipment. He told me that every capsule in that cargo represented another day for someone like my sister, and that was reason enough to risk the flight. By the second month, something remarkable happened. A young scientist named Laura Whitfield, Peter's sister, discovered that combining 2 treatments in a specific sequence slowed the sickness enough to allow the body's natural defenses to catch up. It was not a perfect cure, but it was enough. Slowly, painfully, our people began to recover. I remember the first time I saw color return to my mother's face after weeks of exhaustion and worry. I remember my father standing in the fields, watching new grain sprout through soil that had been poisoned only weeks before. I remember Osa, still weak but smiling, asking Peter 100 questions about his home planet, while he patiently answered every single one. The humans stayed for 4 more months after that first breakthrough, ensuring the sickness did not return, rebuilding what had been damaged, and training our own doctors in methods we had never known before. They did not ask for recognition. They did not ask for special treatment. They simply worked, day after day, until the danger had truly passed. I remember the day Daniel Ross announced that his team would finally return home, now that our colony was stable and self-sufficient again. I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness, grateful that our people were safe, yet unwilling to see them leave after everything we had shared. Before they departed, I asked Grace Bennett one final question. I asked her what her people gained from helping us, when there had been no promise of reward, no guarantee of thanks, and no obligation beyond a simple call for help. She told me that some choices are not about gain at all. She said that when someone asks for help and everyone else turns away, answering that call becomes its own reason, whether or not anything is gained in return. I did not fully understand her answer then. I understand it now. Even after the danger passed, small challenges kept testing everyone's patience. Our soil, though growing again, produced grain far weaker than before, and for a while it seemed our people might face hunger even after surviving the sickness. A quiet young botanist named Ellen Marsh, part of Daniel's team, spent weeks testing different combinations of nutrients pulled from our own moons, refusing every suggestion to import food from human supply lines instead. She told me that teaching us to grow strong again mattered more than simply feeding us for a season. By the time her work was finished, our fields produced grain richer than anything we had grown in years, and she taught our farmers every method herself, before she ever considered leaving. I also remember a boy from our colony named Torv, barely older than Osa, who had lost both his parents to the sickness before the humans arrived. He refused to speak to anyone for weeks, sitting alone at the edge of the medical bay, staring at nothing. It was Laura Whitfield who eventually reached him, not through medicine, but through patience. sitting beside him every evening without demanding a single word, until one night he finally spoke about his mother's laugh and his father's habit of singing while working the fields. Laura never tried to replace what he had lost. She simply made sure he was never alone while he carried it. A year later, the Velcar Assembly returned to Ril 7 with a formal delegation, offering renewed trade agreements and careful apologies about necessary precautions during the outbreak. My father received them with the same patience our people have always shown, calm and measured, without anger in his voice. I stood at the back of that meeting, and I could not match his patience. I remembered the silence of that first week, when every ally we trusted disappeared into the black sky without a second thought. I remembered the small human ship that broke through the clouds when no one else would come, carrying people who owed us nothing yet gave us everything. I do not say this to claim that humans are without fault. Grace told me herself, during one of our last conversations, that her people had made mistakes in their own history, turning away from those who needed them at times when it mattered most. She said that was exactly why some of them chose never to do it again, carrying that memory as a reason to act differently whenever the chance appeared. I think about that memory often now, years later, whenever I look up at the sky above Ril 7. Our fields are full again. Our children run through grain that once carried a disease with no name. Our doctors, trained by patient teachers who refuse to give up on us, now help other colonies facing their own crises. Sometimes, distant ships pass through our system, vessels from the same species that abandoned us during our darkest days. I do not feel anger anymore, only distance, a quiet understanding that some bonds break in moments of fear, while others are forged in moments of choice. My sister Osa is grown now, working alongside human researchers who return each year to check on our progress, sharing knowledge freely in both directions. She often speaks of Peter Whitfield's patience, of Laura's careful mind, of Grace's calm strength, and of Daniel's quiet determination that never wavered even when success seemed impossible. I write this account not as a complaint against those who left us, but as a record for anyone who wonders what true commitment looks like when tested by real danger. It is easy to make promises when the sky is calm. It is easy to sign agreements when there is nothing to lose. The true measure of any bond is revealed only when the storm arrives and someone must decide whether to stay or leave. The Velcar Assembly left. Our own distant relatives left. Every treaty we once trusted proved to be nothing more than words written for easier days. Only the humans stayed, not because they had to, not because they were promised anything in return, but because a call for help had reached them, and they simply could not walk away from it. I am Vesic of Ril 7, and my family is alive today because when the galaxy turned its back on us, a small group of humans chose to turn toward us instead. That choice changed everything, and it is a debt we will never forget, though I suspect they would tell us there was never any debt to repay at all. Our colony stands today as proof that survival is not only about strength or resources. Sometimes, survival depends entirely on who is willing to answer when everyone else has already left. I often think back to that first morning, when the last Velcar ship shrank into the black sky and left nothing behind but silence. I think about how easily that silence could have become the end of our story, if a small human transport had simply followed the same path as every other ship and turned away. Instead, that ship broke through our clouds when no one expected help to come from any direction at all. Osa still tells the story to visiting researchers, describing the fever she barely remembers and the calm voice of a woman in an oversized suit who promised nothing except that she would try. My father, now older and slower, still walks the grain fields every morning, running his hand across stalks that once carried nothing but disease. My mother keeps a small photograph on our wall, taken during those difficult months, showing Grace Bennett kneeling beside Osa's cot with a tired but determined smile. I do not know what future challenges our colony will face, or which allies will stand beside us when the next crisis arrives. I have learned not to assume loyalty simply because of old treaties or shared history. I have learned instead to watch closely for those who answer a call for help without asking what they will gain in return. If another storm ever threatens Ril 7, I do not know who will come. But I know now what true commitment looks like, because I have seen it with my own eyes, standing in a dying field, wearing a suit 2 sizes too large, refusing to leave until the work was done. That is the story of my family, and of the small group of humans who chose to stay when the rest of the galaxy chose to walk away.